Let me start this review by saying that my expectations for this game were quite low. It just didn't look like very much, but I knew that it had an interesting and very unusual story as well as gameplay, which appealed to me. If you've seen my review of Control, you will know that I generally enjoy games that include unusual and trippy gameplay, segments where the character is experiencing a nightmare or drug-induced hallucinations of some sort are always interesting to me. And here we have a whole game in which taking drugs is the only way to blend in with the rest of society. The thing is, I thought that this would be a linear action game, but to my surprise, it turned out that I was actually playing an RPG with a mostly open world. But before I delve into all of that, let's talk about the game's ultra-wide support. The thing is, this game supports 21:9 without any issues, but if you want to push to 32:9, you will find that the image is stretched. You do have a field of view slider, which helps a lot and almost makes the game feel as though it offered true 32:9, but it's not quite there. Still, for the most part, playing in ultra-wide and super ultra-wide works really well. At least you don't have to modify any kind of files or fixes. One of the things you will notice are the graphics. Initially, I was not a fan of how the game looks. The fact that there are only a handful of NPC types only served to make the first impression even worse. You will constantly see multiple non-playable characters around who all look the same. Hell, even outfits mostly will match. This really bothered me, but if you do play it for a while, you will get used to it. If I had to compare the game to other RPGs, I would say it's a lot like Fallout 3 and Skyrim. Remember how most NPCs there had the same voice actor and looked identical? Well, we got used to it rather quickly there, and it's the same here. As soon as you have played a few hours, these things don't bother you as much as they did at first. You are already immersed in the game. The game has a low budget and was mostly crowd-funded. I believe in this case I can cut them some slack. Bethesda got away with it, so why shouldn't this one do? On the other end, the bugs are something I can't be quite as forgiving about. You see, mere minutes after I had started the game, my character jumped over a small fence, clipped halfway through the floor in front of him and got stuck. After trying for a few minutes, I was forced to restart the game. Luckily, it had placed a checkpoint not far from where it all had happened. Still, these kinds of bugs are sadly not uncommon. NPCs often behave erratically and teleport for no apparent reason. This is especially bad when you're trying to perform a stealth takedown on your target and it just vanishes in front of your eyes and appears somewhere else. The result is them seeing you and starting an alarm which summons all of their friends and they kick your ass. Another time I found a treasure chest which I could not fully dig up. In other words, I was not able to extract the loot which was inside of it, and the marker for the chest remained on my map as something to do, and there was nothing I could do to make it disappear. But let me step back a bit and tell you more about the game's story. The most interesting thing about that is that you actually play 3 campaigns, each of them with a different character. They all live in England in a time not long after the Second World War. Things are very dystopian as society is falling apart, and the only thing holding everything together is a drug called joy. As long as people take it, they experience perpetual bliss and remain ignorant to the harsh reality of things. Refusing to take the drug, however, or simply being incapable due to physical intolerance, leads to people being branded as downers and exiled to the slums, where they have to live in ruins and scavenge whatever they can for food. Our first protagonist, Arthur, is a hardworking member of the upper middle class. He takes his joy and is always happy until one day a repressed memory of his lost brother surfaces. This is when he realizes that there is something important he has to remember and decides not to take any more drugs. His co-workers quickly realize he's off his joy and he's branded a downer. Shortly after, he ends up in the slums. At first, the map appears pretty small, especially due to the fact that the game uses fog of war, meaning that you can only see on the map what you have already discovered. The first section is more of a tutorial area, giving you a few quests and other side activities in limited amounts. You level up a bit and get to allocate some skill points into perks, almost all of which are quite useful. You are taught early on that there is a rudimentary survival system at play which requires you to eat, drink and sleep besides paying attention to your health and stamina. However, that system is truly minimal, as food and drinks are plentiful and you will never really be in danger of going thirsty or hungry. The crafting system also encourages exploration and hoarding of anything you can find. It's all very ordinary for an RPG and I assure you none of it is overwhelming. There's a social system here as well. In the slums, for example, you are expected to wear rags, otherwise the other people will attack you. There's also a curfew in place, meaning that you are supposed to be sneaky at night, otherwise the enforcers will remind you not to be out and about with brute force. As you advance to the parts of the map where the higher society lives, you will be accepted only if you look the part and behave appropriately. This means that you can't sprint, jump around, or sneak openly. You can't do any of this. All of those things alongside any clothes in poor condition will awaken the suspicion that you are not on joy and in fact a downer, which can quickly get you in trouble. This barely scratches the surface, but but I fear it would be way too boring for me to explain every gameplay mechanic here, as it is quite deep for a game with such simple looks. It definitely scratches the RPG fans exactly where they itch. Many of these restrictions can be lifted by getting the correct perks, so doing side quests and random encounters is not only interesting but also very rewarding. If you do everything, you can actually unlock every perk, so that's very satisfying. In addition, the map hides tons of secrets and offers the players many ways of dealing with problems. You could be stealthy or kill everyone quietly. You could go in hot and beat everyone without giving a damn about noise. You can even choose if you want to kill or just incapacitate. The best part is that the game does not punish you if you want to kill people. It's up to you. No one will judge you and it won't have any influence on the ending. The one thing I was missing were speech checks. Indeed, there are no options to talk yourself out of anything. As you progress through the story, you will meet several more relevant characters. Everything is voice acted and the voice acting is quite good. I want to mention at this point that the game is extremely British, which actually entertained me quite a lot because there are expressions in British English which are quite humorous, but due to the fact that most games are not recorded with that accent, we almost never hear them. The world is designed very well, and while there are lots of houses with the same internal layout, it's still fun to explore them and rob everyone blind at night. Just make sure you don't get overburdened with all that loot. And since I've mentioned the carrying of loot, let me tell you about the inventory expansion. You will find items which increase your carrying capacity. The thing is, those items are bags. The game teaches us that clothing is worn on the character, so I tried to equip the bags and nothing happened. They just stood in my inventory. So I assumed that was how they were supposed to work. They just stood there and expanded the slots. Turns out you have to consume them in the same way you would consume food in the game. Somehow I had missed that and played about half of the first campaign like a dumbass. I know what you're thinking, you know you are to blame here, but the truth is, they could have told the player somehow. This is a common problem with complex RPGs. They tend not to explain things sufficiently. The combat is in first person and almost exclusively melee. You don't get to shoot until the first DLC of the game, if we don't count the various throwable items. It works quite well and you have a good feeling for both range of your swings as well as how hard they hit. You can also block, giving you additional versatility, but fighting multiple opponents, especially in the early game, will almost always spell death for you. Later, as you get better, acquire superior weapons and perks, things can look very differently. Still, sneaking around remains a very satisfying option, at least for me. Our first campaign is the easiest one since he is a jack of all trades and can do a bit of everything. He's great at chemical crafting but also at tinkering. He can sneak, blend in with the fancy crowd, and also pack a punch. While you play him, the streets will have fewer amounts of people and the more dangerous enemies will only appear by the end of his campaign. Upon reaching the credits for the first time, you unlock the second campaign, and our protagonist this time is Sally. She's a gentle flower and a genius when it comes to chemistry, but completely incapable of mechanical crafting. Her fighting skills are okay, but since the streets now feature more NPCs, it's generally better not to try to brawl while playing her. The campaign crosses with that of Arthur, and playing as her helps us understand a lot of what is unclear at first. There are a few mechanics at play here which drive the difficulty spike up as well. Without spoiling anything, I will just say that she has to go back to her house from time to time, otherwise she suffers from a debuff which causes her carrying capacity to decrease as time passes. This can be quite annoying, but is luckily something to consider within the first third of the story only. The player will be offered a solution for that problem so that you can explore and level up without having to bother to go back. What shocked me at first was the fact that her campaign is almost as long as Arthur's. Since it's a new character, you start as a blank slate, neither your inventory nor your perks carry over. As a matter of fact, each character gets a few special unique perks and passives for themselves which you need to level up from the ground up. The game offers a quick travel system, but it's restricted to being able to move between fixed points on the map. You find these underground sewer shelters and can travel between them. This does slow you down, and since there aren't that many, it's often a difficult choice. Do I travel 5 minutes in the opposite direction of my objective and then fast travel somewhere much closer, or do I walk for 10 minutes towards the objective and perhaps gather a few berries along the way? The game's quests will often ask you to walk around, and by the end of the second campaign, I was beginning to feel a bit fatigued from all the running around the map. It can be quite tedious. As you finish Sally's story, you are introduced to Ollie, a deserter from the army. His desertion, however, was because he saw that the army failed the people and refused to be part of this. He's second to none when it comes to brawling and tinkering, but has no idea about chemistry. Also, I do like that he's foul-mouthed and generally disliked by most people. Initially, it's not even possible for him to move among the upper class without being attacked on sight. This made the game even harder by the fact that during his campaign, the streets are full with NPCs. In addition to that, he's a diabetic and has to take insulin. You get a special indicator regarding his blood sugar levels and have to try to keep it balanced, otherwise you suffer various debuffs. I found it very amusing that one of the negative side effects of having low blood sugar levels is that Ollie will insult people on sight, making them attack him. His campaign also crosses with that of Arthur and helps understand everything even better. The great thing about all three storylines is that they all feature some kind of plot twist. Nothing is as it seems, and it's quite impressive how such an intricate story is told so well using limited resources. I realized that I genuinely cared for the characters in this game as I was playing it. I did mention the great voice acting, but I have to also give credit to the good humor. The game targets a mature audience and is not afraid to make it obvious. As you finish Ollie's story, the main game is over. You can play the arcade mode, which is a fun addition that will easily squeeze a few more hours of your day, but the 3 DLCs are where it's at if you want more. Those are quite unique and all revolve around secondary characters you have met during the first 3 main stories. The great thing about them is that they are very different from the main game. New maps, new characters, new weapons, and vastly different gameplay mechanics. In the first one, you witness the adventure of Roger and James, who fight off a small robotic mutiny. This is where you get the first and only firearm in the game. The DLCs are obviously shorter than the main game, but really mix things up and will still take you about 4 hours to beat each of them. So that's not bad at all. The second revolves around the rock legend Nick Lightbearer and his drug-induced nightmares. This one was the least fun for me of the 3, simply because the combat involves using your guitar and playing music on it. On the other hand, there were lots of crazy nightmare sections, which if you paid attention is something I enjoy a lot. Let's just say that it was more original than fun to play. The last DLC was also the most ambitious one. Not only did it offer a conclusion to the whole story, but it also brought a much spicier combat, great mobility, and was generally well designed. To be honest, jumping from roof to roof in this dark dystopian city reminded me of the game called Dishonored. In the end, we happy few left me thirsting for more. Game developers were ambitious and clearly set out to do a lot with a little, and the craziest thing is, they mostly succeeded at it. This is genuinely a good game which offers tons of content, a deep and engaging story, and well-designed gameplay. It does have bugs and the art style looks more like a necessary compromise than a design choice, but it still managed to impress me. One can only hope that we will get to see a sequel to this game in which many of the issues can be remedied. So as always, this is the part where we ask ourselves if this would be a good game for you, the viewer of this video. If you think of Fallout 3 and New Vegas as well as Skyrim fondly, then this will probably be very enjoyable to you. It's not nearly as huge of a game as those were, but it actually lets you play as 3 different unique characters and tells a much more compelling story while still keeping most of the RPG mechanics intact. If you do decide to play this game, just be sure to get a few days off because the game offers many hours of gameplay. We're talking 30 to 40 hours easily. If you try to do all the quests at least, as I did. In any case, I enjoyed it and I recommend it to all of my viewers who like a good story paired with solid RPG gameplay. Thank you for watching and have a great day.